if you have a unspoken agreement, okay, that's covert, and your partner doesn't actually know what it is, she can't or he can't meet your expectations. And resentments are, what I would say, resentments are expectations that have been born into resentments. So when I have an expectation and that expectation doesn't get met, what it's replaced with is a resentment. And then the resentment is what starts to create distance in a relationship and starts pulling it apart.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Mashbitz. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me here. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. First and most important question, Chuck, is how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
Thanks. Let me sit with that for a second here. I think I'm doing well. Like I always say, life seems to go in these cycles, where you're like, things are good, and then they kind of slow down, you get to the bottom, and it's like everything's kind of crappy, and then it kind of swings back up. I think I'm on top of that cycle right now, so I'm just enjoying that space while it lasts. Knowing that this too shall pass.
For sure. When was the last time maybe you were at a low point?
Yeah, it was probably a few months ago. There's been a lot of difficulty on my wife's side of the family, kind of starting with her son, who's had a drug addiction issue for like the last 5 years, and just caused a lot of stress and strife in our relationship. We would, like I said, kind of do good for sometimes, but the good news is that he recently got himself into rehab, and he called us last night. He's got 68 days of sobriety.
Amazing.
And, just with that kind of pressure gone, it's really like alleviated stress in our relationship. And I think that's also kind of got us back to more of a, equilibrium in our relationship.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Sure.
But to get into your expertise, nice guys, which is an amazing topic that I'm very excited to dive into with you. First, let's just start off by basically defining what you think or what you've come to know what a nice guy is.
Yeah, sure. So a nice guy isn't actually a nice guy. All right. When we think of a nice guy, a nice guy is what I would call fraudulently nice. All right. He's nice because his main intention is to get people to like him. And so in his attempt to get people to like him, he'll often do things like tell you one thing, but then do another. He's the kind of the boss that's like says yes all the time, but then goes off and, changes things at the last minute. He's the kind of guy that, his relationship with his wife, she kind of runs the show, and he just kind of like goes along with whatever she wants in order to make her happy. All the while building up all of these resentments inside, and then kind of acting out passive aggressively, in his relationships. And nice guys do things like they create what we call covert contracts. In other words, I'm going to do something for you with an expectation that you're going to do something in return for me, but I'm not going to tell you about this contract. You're just supposed to know. And so those, maybe it's something like, I'm going to clean up the house. So when my wife gets home, she'll want to, have a little sexy time or something, And then when she doesn't, when she comes home and she's like, oh, you missed a spot or something like that, then the nice guy gets all bent out of shape. Nice guys are typically have low sense of self-esteem. They really don't know who they are. They have this kind of a core belief that says, I'm not lovable and acceptable just the way that I am, so I have to be different in order to get people to like, love, and accept me. Nice guys typically aren't really good leaders. They're more passive. instead of aggressive. And nice guys oftentimes have a big struggle with things like procrastination, putting important things off. And so the nice guy, when we say nice guy, we're really not talking about somebody who's genuinely nice. We're talking about, like I said, somebody who's fraudulently nice. And the opposite of a nice guy isn't a jerk. The opposite of a nice guy is what I call an integrated man who has a lot of self-awareness. He knows himself. He's working on himself. He can show up authentically in his relationship, speak his truth with kindness, be generous without caretaking, without being codependent, and has a real good sense of self and likes himself just the way that he is, knowing that he's also got room for improvement. So that's how I would explain the nice guy.
Yeah. Do you think nice in and itself is a virtue that we should be trying to obtain?
No, I think nice. I mean, we kind of use the word nice as a, like, it's not necessarily a taboo word, but I think nice in terms of like integrity of, being kind, being generous, being compassionate, being loyal, all of those virtues, I think, can describe somebody who's nice. But in the way I use it, it's actually describing somebody who's says they're nice or wants people to think that they're nice when really they're not operating from a place of virtues.
Yeah. When did you discover that this was you, and when did you make the shift?
Yeah. So this was, probably 15 years or so ago, maybe a little bit more. I was doing my own work. I was in a men's group. I was seeing a therapist, and he had a men's group. And the group we were in was quitting for the summer. And so I wanted to continue on my work in some way. So I was like looking around for different men's groups in the area, and I came across a local men's group and contacted the guy. And he said he was running this group. It was based on this book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, who lived up in Seattle. And while I didn't end up joining that group, I got the book and I read it. And my experiences, which a lot of other guys that have read the book have the same experience, is like, holy cow, this guy's been following me around and writing my life story. And it was all of these ways in which what I thought was about being nice was actually working against me and also not getting me what I really wanted in life. And from that point, this was also about the time I decided to become a therapist and went back to school. After I became a therapist, I contacted Robert Glover, the author, and turned out he had some training going on up in Seattle, and I live in Portland, so it was like a 3-hour drive. So I went to that training, became one of his certified therapists and coaches during that. But we also started kind of a relationship. And so I've been working with him really closely for the last 7-8 years, helping him. I've done some groups with him. I've done, I wrote a book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, the 30-Day Recovery Journal, which is an addendum to No More Mr. Nice Guy. It's kind of like if you read No More Mr. Nice Guy, this is kind of the next step for you to take. He endorsed that and wrote the foreword to that. But just kind of developed a relationship with him, both professionally and personally. And he's become a mentor, a friend, confidant, somebody that, I've really grown to love and admire.
Amazing. Yeah, I've listened to quite a few of him on podcasts as well as yourself. So whatever nice guy tendencies I had or still do have, I'm relearning those from you guys. So much appreciated.
Yeah, of course.
But why do you think nice guys finish last?
Well, nice guys finish last because they accept what's given to them, and nobody's going to give you first place.
Right.
So nice guys typically settle for what's available. It might be like table scraps kind of thing. Nice guys are oftentimes kind of like the lapdog, they're just going along to get along. Whatever they are offered, they take. They don't really have a good sense of self in terms of like, what do I actually want in my life? What do I want my life to look like? something that oftentimes comes up with the guys that I'm coaching. I'll ask them a question. I'm like, so what do you want? You know, and it's such a foreign concept to them because nobody's ever asked them that. What they've been told their entire life is like, this is what you do. You know, this is what is expected of you. So when it comes to actually knowing what they want in life and love and success and all of that, they don't really know. And so that in and of itself is kind of a starting point for most nice guys, like figuring out, okay, what do I want and what do I want my life to look like, and starting to take some ownership in creating the kind of life that they want. So.
Yeah. I think that's why for young men specifically, sports are so powerful.
Totally. Yeah.
You know, like they changed the whole fabric of my life. Now there's some other pitfalls of playing in sports that come with that sort of drive and obsessiveness, which is, you know, a different conversation. But there obviously are tremendous amount of positive qualities that come from being on a sports team or being in a community that's competitive, but also at the same time uplifts one another. I think that's the important part. Like I specifically coach and play baseball. So I know that baseball is an extremely individual sport in a team setting. So if I don't execute and own my role to the best of my ability, I'm going to get it from my teammates, which is the same way as holding each other accountable. And I think that's a beautiful way to start learning what you actually want. Because when sports get really hard, if you're not in love with that sport, you don't want it. Like you get cut from the team and you're like, I'm good. This is not for me. That's totally fine. But you also learn like, okay, is this truly what I want? Or, you know, speaking in a business sense, or do you really love this girl? You made this mistake. Are you really trying to fight to get her back? Are you willing to change and grow and evolve because of this? And so understanding that question of what do you really want is extremely powerful and extremely deep, that you're not just be able to answer it in a second. You have to actually think about it and sit with it and talk to mentors or friends or people who know you well and be in the trenches with it and all of that stuff. And then eventually you might be able to come up with an answer, at least somewhat of it, and you can go down that direction. And it might change, but at least you're headed in the right direction.
Totally. Yeah. I think sports are a great way for especially young men to start figuring out, you know, what they want in life, and it gives them purpose, and it gives them meaning, and it gives them community, it gives them the ability to work with other people and all those things. I think for my experience was I wasn't really good at sports growing up. It wasn't like a natural talent for me. And in typical sort of nice guy fashion, it's like, if I'm not good at it, then I'm not going to try to get good at it. I'm just going to quit, you know? So like I was in Little League. I was out in left field all the time, you know, and it was remember being on a junior high basketball team and just like getting kind of bowled over. I mean, back then I was like the shortest kid in my class. I was in high school and shot up to 6'2", but back then I was a short kid. And so I never really got into sports until later in life. I got into more kind of the individual sports like golf and, you know, things like that. But I absolutely agree with you that sports and being on a sports team, that can really help young men develop, you know, into more what we call an integrated man. By, you know, not giving up when things get hard, not taking things personally, not, learning to continue. I mean, when things get hard, you just keep going. And those are some qualities I think that, at least in my life, were missing. And part of that was because it's just my experience with sports was completely different, you know? Yeah. I was more of a fan than a sports fanatic. Or good at sports.
I mean, there's no reason it has to be sports, right? That's just, there's very few places where that sort of culture exists. Like, it's hard to replicate that in like a religious community. That's an amazing place too, to connect with your higher power and a spiritual being. But there's no real like effort and competition and like things of that nature, which are just another side of the coin. Like, I guess Boy Scouts could be one could be really powerful. But I've just never found anything like sports. And the thing I think people get wrong is that they think their son has to be a professional athlete. Like, no, 0% of them are going to be athletes. It's just about participating in something. It's about being a part of something, having a sense of belonging, and then learning those lessons because of that.
Yeah. And I think one of the things too is like the masculine energy is about being assertive, being competitive, learning to go out, 10,000 years ago out in the wilderness, the tribes had to go out and hunt, the men went out and hunted and gathered and brought stuff back, that we're not in the same situation anymore, but there's still a need for us, I think, as men, especially to learn to challenge ourselves. And if we aren't challenging ourselves, then we're not growing. And if we're not growing, then we just kind of become more and more passive. And I think the more passive we become, the less attractive we become. And then, we sort of give ourselves over to like, well, I guess this is just the way life's supposed to be. And we sit there on the couch eating Cheetos and playing video games. So, yeah. I don't know. I mean, that doesn't sound like thriving to me.
No, absolutely not. Where does people pleasing play a part in all this? Is it similar? Is it the same? Is it just part of the sphere of nice guy?
Yeah, it's part of the sphere of the nice guy. I mean, people pleasing again is this idea that if I can get you to like me, well, let me back up. It's an underlining limiting belief, oftentimes coming on at the unconscious. But the belief is that if I meet everyone else's needs around me without them asking, then everyone will meet my needs without me asking. And so the people pleasing is, I'm going to take care of you, right? And my expectation is you're going to take care of me. And it goes back to that covert contract kind of thing. But the people pleasing aspect of it is about trying to get something from the other person, as opposed to, let me just give this to you as a gift, no strings attached. I have no attachment to the outcome. And I think that's the difference between, caring, I care about you as a person, I want you to have this, versus caretaking or people pleasing, which is, I'm going to do this for you and I'm going to have an expectation that you're going to do that for me or something similar in the future.
Yeah. Do you find that most guys who have these nice guy tendencies develop them from upbringing, from society, or a combination of both?
Yeah, kind of a combination, but a lot of it goes back to our, being raised. Oftentimes, everybody's story is different, but in general speaking, oftentimes we're in a culture where young boys are raised by women, right? And so I was taught, basically like, don't be like your father, don't be like other men, don't be aggressive, don't be dangerous, be more like a woman, compassionate, having, caring and all of those kind of things, which those are great qualities. But I think what happens is we start, to get a little Freudian psychology on you here, we start with our mom being our idea of what the feminine is, right? And so if we discover at an early age that if I do what mom wants, she's happy, and if I don't do what she wants, she's mad, I start developing this unconscious pattern of trying to please her, make her happy. And what happens is oftentimes, we're trying to make her happy, and then we don't understand that, she has her own thoughts, feelings, responsible for her own process. We just know that if she's upset, I feel anxious. So I will make her feel not upset so I don't have to feel anxious. And then we bring that into our adult lives when we have, a partner, right? So if my partner is upset, I get really anxious and I want to make her not anxious so that I don't have to feel anxious and upset. So I do people-pleasing behaviors, even though that might not be within my integrity, just to get her to stop being upset with me. So, for example, maybe she's upset, and I know that if I tell her the full truth, she's going to get more upset. I also know that if I tell a half truth or I leave some information out, that'll make her feel better. And because her being upset with me causes me this anxiety, the nice guy will opt to cover their mistakes, tell half-truths, do whatever they can to basically get out of trouble so that they can have a problem-free, smooth life.
Do you see any like distinction if a man just grows up with a single mom, or if it has both parents in the household? Like, is it still that way? That, I mean, obviously, potentially, he could always turn out to be, have these
Sure.
nice guy tendencies. But is there any data maybe that shows the difference between the two?
I wouldn't say there's any hard data, at least that I know of. I mean, I'm sure maybe there is more specific to the nice guy. I mean, I'm sure there's data about, single parent homes and all of that. But I think more kind of, anecdotally, the thing that I've seen is the guys that I work with, they typically have a very dominant mother and a passive father. So the father tends to be more of the nice guy, or he's checked out, he's going to work. He's, doing his thing, and the mom is the one that has the most sort of power over the kids. And I think that, whether that's a single mom or that's a parenting kind of thing, the parenting, we know, has a huge impact on how we grow up. So what was modeled for us when we were younger is generally what we take into our adulthood and try to make our world adapt to that, because that's what we know. I think another thing that nice guys typically do is they end up being attracted to women who remind them of their mother in some way, because we're attracted to the familiar. So even though she might look different, sound different, there's something about her that feels a little bit familiar, and familiarity creates attraction. And we don't necessarily realize that until we're way into the marriage, or, years later, when it's like, oh my God, she's just like my mom, So I think that oftentimes as nice guys, we will typically have a mother who is more dominant, who is more about, you need to take care of me. So that can either be, covertly or overtly. It might be a thing of, some moms, I think, they're unhappy in their relationship. And so they, and, not saying that they do this necessarily consciously, but then they start putting the loneliness or the connection that they're seeking, that they sought from their partner, they try to get it from the child or from the young boy, and that can even be things like confiding in the young boy about his father. Hey, you know what? Your father's a jerk. He's really hurt me. Don't be like that, And in a way, it kind of creates this almost an emotional incest, where the boy feels like he has to take care of his mother's emotional needs, and sometimes even physical needs, as far as like maybe having to work harder or, keep her happy. And so oftentimes there's a lot of influence that the mom can have. And I think that women who are more conscious of the impact of their mothering, having on their children, then they strive to raise, young boys and young women who are more, have more individuation. They're individuals. And oftentimes what we'll see in the context of these relationships, these younger relationships, is that the codependency creates what we would call an enmeshment. And the enmeshment is the child becomes an appendage of the mother, and a reflection of the mom. So if you get in trouble at school, you're going to make me look bad in front of my friends. It's not that you're an individual and you messed up and that's okay. It's like, you made me look bad. Those are the kind of messages that the young boy can take into his life and start developing, these areas in his psyche that then become, okay, I need to make everybody happy. I can't mess up. If I do mess up, I have to hide those mistakes because I don't want to reflect poorly on other people. And so that rather than individuating and being their own person, they remain an extension of their parent or their partner. And that's what we call codependency.
Yeah. Seems like they're taking away their agency. to,
Exactly.
to express themselves in a, whatever authentic way they know how to at a young age.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it's all, it is all about helping your children have agency so that they can individuate. They see themselves as separate from you. Because what happens then is we grow up and we get in partnership, we tend to see our partner in the same way, right? So if she's upset, I'm upset. Versus she's upset, she's upset.
Yeah.
I can be compassionate for her. I can have empathy and that kind of thing, but I don't have to actually be upset and try to get her unupset.
Yeah. So yeah,
and I think that's kind of what the nice guy does.
You want to avoid the devouring mother, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's tough.
What kind of family system did you grow up in? I mean, what was that like for you? If you don't mind.
I probably say this on every single episode, so I'm more than happy to say it again. But I have the greatest parents that I think have ever existed in the whole world. Yeah. My parents are still together, and they were the best example possible. They've supported me in every endeavor I've ever had. I mean, come on, how can if you can support a son becoming a professional wrestler, there's just there's no career path that I could have chose that would have been like, no, that's weird. Right. And my parents talking to their friends,
a drag queen, but
hey, still dress up, whatever, rock and roll. My parents probably got the worst of it because all their friends were like, yo, what's your son doing? Why is he? Yeah. And my parents were like, he loves it. That's what he wants to do. And we support him in that. So there's just, for me, amazing. And my mom on her side grew up with a lot of men. Great. So she encouraged a lot of masculine energy in me. Good. That was cool and awesome. My dad's a great guy, obviously. So yeah, I'm super lucky. So lucky. Unbelievably lucky.
Yeah. So that's awesome.
It's amazing. But I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want to have a little bit of deeper chat about the covert contracts, which I find extremely interesting. So I know you mentioned them, but could we just go into a little further at that?
Sure. Okay, so what's a contract is an agreement between two people, right? Covert is something that's hidden. Overt is something that is out in the open. So covert contract is an agreement that is hidden. And a lot of times this kind of agreement, again, kind of an unconscious kind of thing, is this idea that if I do something for someone else, they will in return do something for me. And I think this isn't just with nice guys. I think that this is kind of it's a part of the nice guy syndrome, but I think it can happen in a lot of different contexts. We find that, if I do something positive, I get rewarded for it. Right. But if the expectation is every time I do something positive, I get rewarded for it, those times that I don't get rewarded for it, then what do I do with that? I get upset, I get angry, right? So if you have a unspoken agreement, okay, that's covert, and your partner doesn't actually know what it is, she can't or he can't meet your expectations. And resentments are expectations that have been born into resentments. So when I have an expectation and that expectation doesn't get met, what it's replaced with is a resentment. And then the resentment is what starts to create distance in a relationship and starts pulling it apart. So little by little, it becomes like these 1,000 paper cuts, All right, I thought she was going to do this for me. A classic covert contract would be, you're feeling anxious. You want to know if your partner loves you, feels good, right? So you say, I love you, not with the intention of loving your partner, but waiting for that I love you in return. So I feel anxious. I love you. She says, I love you too. Okay, I can feel a little bit better right now. But if I say, I love you, and she's like, all of a sudden I feel like crap, right? So we tend to have these things. And the point is to kind of understand and recognize Like, it's okay to have contracts with people. It's okay to have expectations. It's just like, let's make them overt. Let's talk about it. So, hey, babe, here's the thing. 2 nights a week you cook, 2 nights a week I'll cook, and 2 nights we go out, or something like, one night we'll have bad math. Something along those lines. Anyway, it's out in the open, right? Everybody knows what the expectations are, right? And then if the expectations don't get met, then you have something to discuss and say, hey, what happened? Because we had this agreement that this is what we were going to do, and then you can go deeper into that. But if you don't talk about these things, if you don't let the other person know what your expectations are, then it's just going to lead to resentments. So I think ultimately a covert contract is an unspoken expectation that you have.
Is there a reason why the nice guy keeps it so covert? Because he secretly thinks that she'll know, or like he doesn't want to upset, like, or rub her the wrong way if he has this expectation or preference, or
yeah. Again, kind of goes back to a couple different fears. I'm unlovable and unacceptable just the way that I am. Nice guys are really, really sensitive to rejection. Okay. The rejection piece is, so if I tell you what I want, there's a chance that you're going to say no. And if you say no, then I'm going to feel rejected. Right? And instead of just being honest and saying, hey, this is what I need, nice guys I've also oftentimes experienced earlier in childhood of, I say what I need and what I'm told is no, you can't have that. Right? I feel this sense of rejection. So if I know I'm not going to get my needs met, I'll just go in the back door and try to get my needs met in another way. And one of the ways to do that is by creating these covert contracts, which is maybe kind of implying sometimes even. I think that, this idea that communication, first of all, communication is really difficult, oftentimes I'll have, like, it might go like this. Driving home, and this happened a couple of years ago before COVID. I need my mouse on my computer went out, and I needed a new mouse, and so it was Friday, and I was thinking about getting this mouse, right? And I'm driving home, and on my way, I'm like, I'm going to stop off at Target and grab a mouse because I need it. So I go off and I get the mouse, and then I come back, and I'm like, as I'm driving home, I'm thinking, okay, she might be upset with me because I'm kind of late and it's Friday. And, if she's upset with me and I say, well, I stopped in, I got a mouse. And then she's like, well, why didn't you wait until Monday? It's Friday. We have plans. You're late. So I think to myself, okay, I'll just tell her traffic was bad. I'll hide this, in order to, not make her upset, controlling her emotions, rather than just saying, oh yeah, I stopped. So when she says, why are you late? For me to just own it and say, I needed a mouse. I stopped and got the mouse. And for, whatever her reaction is her reaction. Right. So as I'm driving home, I'm realizing that I'm doing this, and I'm like, oh, there it goes again. All right. So I made this little vow to myself of, I will tell her, if she asks why you're late, I'll say, I stopped and got a mouse. I got home. She didn't even ask me about anything. We just went on with our evening. And I realized I spent all of this mental energy, around this silly little thing because of my nice guy. The modeling was, you don't get what you want, and you have to make everybody else happy. And so just kind of one of those little windows into my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, but I imagine if you're doing that all day, every day,
exactly,
it's so exhausting. Oh my God, I came in. Then
it is.
No wonder why you don't have energy to have a real conversation with your spouse, or you blow up every time she says you need, because you've been belittling and fighting yourself all day, every day,
all day.
I mean,
yeah,
100%.
Wow. Yeah. And so the thing of it is, like, getting honest, I found that if I'm honest about things, even though there might be a little bit of tension there, that's okay. Nice guys avoid tension. We don't like any kind of tension. And I think when we avoid the tension, what we do is we end up creating bigger problems for ourselves down the road.
Yeah.
Which is, she can't trust me. And it's in these little things, right? So let's say in this scenario over here, I get home, she says, "Why were you late?" And I say, "Oh, traffic was bad." She says, "Okay." And then we get in the car and she's like, "Where'd this mouse come from?" And I'm like, yeah, she's like, "Traffic wasn't bad. You stopped and got a mouse." All of a sudden it's like way bigger than if I would have just told the truth to begin with. Yeah. And that's just a little example of larger types of situations that come up. And so I've created a value in myself about being honest, being radically honest in all things. And then if I'm not honest, if I tell a half truth or I cover it up or something like that, I have another vow to myself that I will go back and I will fess up. Hey, I got to tell you, told a fib. I was afraid I was going to get in trouble, so I told you this. I apologize, and I got to make amends around that. Practicing that a few times is painful enough that when it comes to having the impulse to tell a half-truth, lie, cover up, that I immediately go to, I'm going to have to tell her the truth again eventually, so I might as well just tell her the truth right now. Well,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's practice. It's a skill. We have a saying with the coaches that I work with for my baseball players is that if you lie to a kid, you lose him forever. If you tell him the truth, you lose him for 24 hours. And I think that's really powerful because
that is
if
powerful.
I lie to him,
I don't know, right?
Everything I say to him going forward is not trustworthy anymore. Coach already lied to me once. Now what he says is absolute bullshit. But if I tell him the truth, of course he's going to be upset. He's 15 years old and he didn't make the team, or he's on the second team, or he's not starting. Like, yeah, that sucks. But that emotional bank account is being built with him that he knows when he talks to me, I'm going to tell him the truth. And I love him because of that. And I love him more because I'm telling him the truth. And not easy, never easy. None of this is ever easy. I mean, I've had kids cry in front of me, and that's heartbreaking, and parents crying. But the whole thing is better than if I never got to speak with that kid ever again because he hates me for how much I lied to him.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to steal that from you. Okay.
No problem.
She'll hate me for 24 hours or sure hate me for a lifetime. Same with your relationships, right?
Now thinking about how you help someone overcome this, because we talked about some of the symptoms and the covert contracts and what might come up and all of these sorts of things. But now how do we overcome this? How do we get better?
Yeah. So as a coach and a therapist, generally what I tell guys is a lot of your issues stem from your inability to lead. Okay. Leading yourself first and then leading others. And what we want to do is we want to develop leadership skills in you. All right. Most nice guys aren't very good at leading. Most nice guys have low self-confidence. Most nice guys have a lack of assertiveness, and most nice guys tend to procrastinate. Those are kind of the three things, after working with hundreds of nice guys over the years, that I kind of see as a consistent basis. And so what I want to do is I want to help you move from this idea that I'm unlovable and unacceptable just the way that I am to I love myself. I love myself so much that if I met me on the street, I would like me. I would want to be my friend, right? So how do you do that? Well, you start treating yourself in the way that you would treat a friend. Most nice guys treat themselves like shit. Their internal world, they're constantly beating themselves up, or they're saying, I don't deserve this. So some of it is just by learning to have more confidence, and confidence comes from competence, So competence is I can learn a skill. So one of the skills I can learn is how to communicate more effectively. I learned this skill of communication. Now I've got more confidence when it comes to asking for my needs to be met, something along those lines. We work on the assertiveness piece of it. What do you want? Right? And then go after that, right? And then the procrastination procrastination is just a fear that you're not going to get what you want, right? But if you do the thing, right, generally motivation kicks in. Studies were done that was like motivation kicks in after 15 minutes of doing something. So you probably experience something like this. You're looking for a hammer, you can't find it. You go out to the garage, you can't find it. Start cleaning up a shelf, and then an hour later, the entire garage is clean. Right? And that's because motivation follows action, not the other way around. Nice guys tend to go, well, I'll do it when I feel like it. All right. You're not going to feel like it. Just do it. Get it started for 15 minutes. And if you want to quit after that, go ahead and quit. But most of the time, so it's really about, okay, when I say to myself, I don't feel like doing this, that's a cue for me to like, okay, just get started. Just start it. And then the motivation kicks in afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's a process of changing belief systems too. The belief of I'm unlovable, so why would I work on myself? Nobody else is going to love me. To loving myself. And I think a lot of nights, we're worried that, well, if I love myself, that's going to make me selfish. And if I'm selfish, then people aren't going to like that. And the truth is, like, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to love yourself first so that you have an abundance of love to give others.
Yeah.
So, yeah, first step, self-love.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about, in our modern culture, this sort of attack on masculinity, and how it's affecting specifically young men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's kind of tragic, really. I mean, there's a shadow to everything, right? So masculinity isn't good or bad. It is masculinity has positive qualities and negative qualities, a shadow and a light. It's really easy to focus on the shadow side of things. Okay. Men were built bigger. We have more aggression. We have more tendency to dominate. That's why we get into sports and that kind of thing. That's not a bad thing if those things are tempered under control. Okay? I can use that on the sports field. I can use that if somebody's trying to break into my house and they're going to, kidnap my kids or something like that. I need that aggression and that energy. But when it's used incorrectly, right, and becomes abusive, then it's easy to kind of focus on that. Traditionally, men have been jerks, assholes. Okay, there's enough evidence to kind of state that. And there's also a lot of really great things about men. They're good teachers, they're good providers, they're good. They can go out and they can do something. Not that women can either, but I guess I'm talking more about like feminine, masculine, feminine energy, which we have both of. But the masculine goes out, conquers, provides, brings back the meal for the family, that in kind of a traditional kind of context. And again, not that women can't do it, but it comes from a masculine energy that they're going out and doing it. So when we say being a man is bad, we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're saying masculinity is toxic. All right. Well, yes, it can be. And it can also be healing. It's the thing with poison, different kinds of poisons, right? Poison can become medicine used in the right way. So masculinity in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's just that it needs to be trained into being bridled,
Yeah.
One of my
the best. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say my self-publishing company that I own. I started. It's called Prouse Media, and the word Prouse is a Greek word, and it's used in the verse, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the kingdom of God." The word Prouse there, or the word meek, actually is Prouse, and Prouse is poorly translated there, because what Prouse actually means is power under control. It's the Greeks would go out and they would capture these wild horses, right? They bring them back and they would divide them into two groups: work horses and war horses. The work horses were generally the female horses and male horses, and they would geld, take the balls out of the male horses to get them to be more docile and more under control. The stallions, the ones with their balls, those were the ones that they trained to be war horses, because in the midst of battle, the horse needed to have some aggressiveness, needed to have some assertiveness. And so what they would do is they would train these stallions to such a point that, the slightest pressure of the knee of the rider, or, to be able to stay focused in the midst of battle, when the horse became that well trained, that horse was called Prouse. So the meaning of Prouse is power under control of the rider. So similarly, I want masculinity as a strength. And if I've got say I got a sword and I'm swinging it around, okay, it's going to be dangerous. But I can also learn to use it, and I can become surgical with it. So the idea of training ourselves into, the higher masculine and being more masculine from a higher place of consciousness, that's what I'm really trying to help men, and even the young men, see that masculinity isn't bad, but untrained masculinity can be toxic. Just like femininity, by the way.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, based on what you just said, I mean, the best analogy I've ever heard when it comes to masculinity, it's like a hammer, right? A hammer can be used to build a house, or it can be used to smash someone in the fucking face, right? Yeah. The only way you're going to build something with that hammer is if you have, one, the appropriate role models, the appropriate training, the appropriate coach, a guide, someone showing you the way. Reverse role models, those who do what you don't want to do, are harder, because that's hard for young boys to conceptualize that and say, I don't want to be that, I want to do the opposite. It's much better if we have role models who are doing the thing that they want to do. I think that's the power of social media. But then you also get in the trap of, listening and learning and diving deep into these guys who are not an integrated man. They haven't trained their masculinity to be a power for good and a force for good and for love. Yeah. They've chosen a different route. And so,
Right. So, I like that. Hammer, sword, whatever the instrument is, you can use it for good or bad, right? And that's again, the shadow and light. Everything has that kind of thing to it, I can use my pen to write a thank you letter. I can use my pen to write a scathing note to somebody, tearing them down.
Yeah. So, last thing I want to touch on with you is about the book you wrote. But the first, I want to talk about why you use the word integrity as part of the subtitle. What does that word mean to you?
Yeah, the book is essentially about integrity. Okay, so tell my story about how I was out of integrity for a really long time. Essentially what happened was, I'd gone through divorce. I lost my house. I was drinking and causing havoc, and jumped into another relationship and did a lot of damage there. And then I went into a recovery phase for my alcoholism and prescription pills, and started going to AA. And in AA, my sponsor said to me, he said, Chuck, the reason you're suffering so much is you're out of integrity. And I didn't really know what that meant at the time, but I knew if that was the key, I wanted to figure out what integrity was. So I started okay, what is integrity? What does it actually mean? And oftentimes I'll ask a client, well, what does integrity mean? And they kind of go, it means doing the right thing, or it means being honest. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Integrity comes from the word integra, meaning integrated, right? So Aristotle said the sum is greater than the whole of its parts. A wristwatch, okay? A wristwatch, when it's in integrity, all the little springs and sprockets are working together, serves its purpose, and its purpose is to tell time. take one little sprocket, bend it just a little bit, and suddenly the whole watch is out of integrity. It no longer serves its purpose. So integrity is your internal value system. I mean, old speak would be virtues. What are my virtues? And so as I was looking through this, I just kind of came to, for myself, I defined these 16 different virtues that when I follow them, I'm in integrity. And when I'm out of integrity is generally I'm not following one or more of my own internal virtues. And when I'm out of integrity, I don't serve my purpose. And what I say my purpose is, and what I think everyone's purpose is at their core, is to be a source of love and a source of healing for others. So if I'm out of integrity, I'm no longer able to do that. I'm no longer able to serve others. I'm no longer able to love others. I'm coming at it from a place of ego. So the idea of integrity and having these different virtues. So each of the 16 chapters is one virtue that I discovered for myself was important to me. And, invite the reader to, come up with their own virtues or use these. But the idea of actually think about what your values, your virtues are. And if you find yourself upset or in trouble, generally because there's a value that you had that you went against. Oftentimes they'll say something, somebody will say, well, I have a value of loyalty. I'm like, great. That's great. How often do you betray yourself? How often do you maybe, I'm really loyal, but I might say something behind somebody's back. Are you really loyal? All right. Say something behind somebody's back. They find out about it. They confront you. All of a sudden, you're feeling bad because you're out of integrity. So these are all the things that I found that when I'm not operating in them, I generally find myself in some kind of suffering emotionally. And maybe not always, but at some point, those things tend to come back and bite us. So integrity is about figuring out what your values are, using that as a compass to guide you in all of your decisions that you make.
If you had to pick your top 3 virtues, what would they be?
Yeah. Top 3. First one was courage, because I think courage, you can't have any of the other virtues without courage. And courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Courage means you act in the face of fear. Right? So I don't want to be tenacious. I don't want to be giving or generous. I don't want to have self-control. In order to do those things, I have to override the fear that's inside of me to be able to do those things. So my number 1 is courage. Number 2 is humility. And humility is understanding that I'm no better and I'm no worse than anybody else. And having the humility gives you the ability to have other virtues like empathy, generosity, to be able to see yourself not as more important or less important, but that as humans, Marcus Aurelius said, what's good for the bee is good for the hive, right? So what's good for me individually or what's good for somebody else individually, then collectively is also good for us. So I want to have humility so I can practice basically kind of letting go of my ego and doing things from a place of love, generosity. Probably the next one I would say, let me go with, I'm going to go with tenacity, because that's one that I would think. I'm going to give you more than 3. Tenacity, all right? Tenacity is the ability to keep going even when things get tough, right? And that requires courage, that requires humility, that requires, that you have the fortitude to be able to keep going. That most people quit before the success comes because it's too hard. And so developing tenacity, I'm not going to quit. That's really helped me in a lot of areas of my life, whether it's, getting myself through school, or creating a practice, all the different, writing a book, tenacity. It took a lot of tenacity, to write this book, because nobody was there going like, write this book. It was just me doing it. But it was a value that I had enough. I was like, I'm going to write this book, even if I die trying, like, this book is going to get out there.
Yeah.
And then I think another one that I just want to mention is forgiveness, because I think this is one that people oftentimes struggle with, the idea of what forgiveness is. And that forgiveness doesn't mean that everything is okay. Forgiveness is, there was a debt that was created. Somebody hurt you. All right. And what you're doing when you're forgiving somebody is not saying what they did was okay. What you're saying is, eye for an eye. You poke my eye out. I owe you to take your eye out, right? You punch me in the nose. I owe you a punch back in the nose. Forgiveness is simply saying, I'm not going to collect on the debt. I forgave you. And I'll use an example. Like if I came to you and I was like, Aaron, can I borrow $10? I'll pay you back next week. And next week came and I'm like, oh man, I forgot. I'll get you next week. And then next week came, oh man, I forgot again. I'll get you next week. And then, I forgot again. You might eventually, like, Chuck, don't worry about it. It's $10. All right. You have forgiven the debt. You've given up the right to collect on the debt. Now, if I come back and I'm like, hey, Aaron, can I borrow $10? And you're like, no. I'm like, why not? And you're like, well, you didn't pay me back last time. I was like, I know, but you forgave me. All right. Restoration hasn't happened. All right. And restoration is on the person who took out the debt in the first place. Right. So now that's up to me to restore that trust in you. The way I do that, maybe you see me borrow $10 from this guy and I pay him back the next week, and this guy pay him back the next week. Maybe I come to you and I'm like, man, I know you forgave the debt, but I'm going to pay you back anyway. And here's a Starbucks card for interest, And you see me consistently acting like that. Now, after a period of time, I come back, I'm like, hey, Aaron, can I borrow $10? You're more likely to give it to me, not because you forgave the debt, but because you saw me trying to restore our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So
very cool.
That's why I like forgiveness. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a powerful one. It's a powerful virtue. I mean, all of them are. Yeah. I would say my top three are honesty, gratitude, and resilience. Those would be my top three.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
those are all beautiful.
Yeah. Well,
because honesty.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. You have more to say?
I was just going to say, I think honesty is, nothing will break trust faster than being dishonest. In all of our relationships, the foundation of the relationship is trust.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, gratitude is the thing that, like, you can't be anxious and grateful at the same time. Your brain just can't do that. So if you want to kill anxiety, start a gratitude list and start thinking of all the things you're grateful for. So I love those.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you very much, Chuck. I appreciate you. I appreciate your work. I appreciate all the men that you've helped. You're making the world a better place.
Thanks so much.
It's very noticeable for sure. So thank you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
And if people want more Chuck, everything is linked in the show notes. It's easy to find. Great YouTube channel. Get his book. All the stuff where you can find people at. Social media is very easy these days. So
right.
Yeah. Search his name. It'll come up. I promise.
Yeah.
But thanks for your time, man. And look forward to more chats with you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.